Okay, y'all, I don't even know. Hello again, it's me, Olivia, or Avi if you prefer. Today, I'm somehow here to talk about 14 books that I read in August, which I think is like an all-time record for me. I didn't realize that I was reading that quickly, but I had the Spooky Smart Bitch Readathon hosted by Jordaline that had me reading a lot of stuff. I'm grateful. I'm grateful that I read all these things and a lot of great books in the mix. The first book that I read in August was Evil Eye by April A. Taylor. This book followed a slasher in the midst of a hurricane in Florida. And this book for me, unfortunately, was a big miss because to me, it didn't really have the slasher elements I really wanted. It had like supernatural elements to the slasher at the beginning that didn't seem like they were carried through all the way through, as well as set during a hurricane. And to me, the hurricane part was not well researched in that it wasn't realistic. Like, it didn't seem like she really knew what a hurricane was like, that it seemed like the story, there was just like steady flooding and people were like walking around outside. No mention of like, you know, it was supposed to be like a category, it was like supposed to be like a category 2 or 3 hurricane, and like everyone in Florida had evacuated except for these 5 people. And let me tell you, that's not realistic. I live in South Louisiana, and if there's a category 2 or 3 hurricane, no one's evacuating unless you live like out on an island. If you live on the mainland at all, people hunker down for a category 2. But even so, you wouldn't be like walking around outside during a category 2 hurricane because the winds could still be very dangerous. The winds more than the flooding. I think I watched the movie Crawl the weekend before Hurricane Ida hit here, and I had the same issue with this. I think that like maybe she saw the movie Crawl and thought that's what hurricanes were like, but there's just like steady flooding throughout, but they'll be like walking around outside, and that was supposed to be like a category 5 hurricane, and there's no winds at all. It just doesn't make sense. It seems like both of those things were their idea of a hurricane was like based off of like maybe like images they saw of Katrina or stories they heard from Katrina that they didn't really piece together with like the context with what those images were from. Like, there's not like always a time during a hurricane where the levees break, which is like a thing in both Crawl and Evil Eye, that there's just like, oh, the levees broke. Like, you just expect it to happen. Like, that's not really a thing that you expect to happen. It's like a horrible worst case scenario kind of thing, but it's not something you're expecting to happen. So a pass for me, but maybe it'll be for you. I think that if you're not, if you haven't lived through a hurricane, then you probably aren't as concerned about the specifics. Not that I need it to be like super realistic because it's like a horror novel, but like I could not suspend my disbelief for how much of a miss it was. The next book that I read this month was The Echo Wife by Sarah Gailey, and this book is about a scientist who clones people and finds out that her husband has cloned her to be a better version of her and is now living and dating her. And I don't want to really spoil anything from the story. It's a pretty short book, but it's good. I gave it 4 stars, and I don't read a lot of sci-fi, but I thought it had a lot to say about cyclical trauma and repression and family and like gender roles. It was pretty cool, and the cloning part pretty cool too. I liked it. I read it for because it was the book club pick for my local indie bookstore, so really good. The next book I read was Mermaid Saga Volume 1 by Rumiko Takahashi, and I read this as my reading a horror manga pick for the Spooky Smart Bitch Readathon, but it was also my first Women in Translation Month read for the month because Rumiko Takahashi is a one-woman show. She wrote this whole thing and drew this whole thing, which is just like mind-blowing, incredible to me. The art is beyond incredible. Just like, this is actually like a anniversary edition that has like colored pages, but just like the way her mind works for like how things move across frames when they are like allowed to break the rules and exit frames. The lettering is incredible. Coming from someone who mostly has read Western comics, which has an artist, a colorist, a letterer, a writer, multiple writers, versus like this has one illustrator and one author, is just incredible. And it's kind of a horror themed mermaid story. The mermaids in the story are very horrific. It follows both a boy and a mermaid in this world. If you eat from a mermaid flesh, you either become immortal or you are immediately disfigured and tortured to death and become a monster. Those are your two options, and you don't know which one you're gonna get. But still, people are looking for mermaid flesh all the time. So I will definitely be picking up volume 2 of this because I thought this was very cool. The next book I read this month was The Woman in the Purple Skirt by Natsuko Imamura, and I read this in conjunction with a Japanese translated lit book club that I follow on Bookstagram, and I don't take place, like I don't participate every single month, but I like to because I like to read Japanese lit, and they read a lot of women authors, and this month this just like fit in well with Women in Translation Month, and I was really excited to read it. The Woman in the Purple Skirt is a weird story about a woman in a yellow cardigan who is obsessed with the woman in the purple skirt and is so hyper focused on her. All of these weird workplace things happened. It reminded me of another Japanese book that I read, Miss Ice Sandwich, and they're both just like weird workplace stories. I listened to it on audiobook, and like in my book club agreed that it's hard to like follow all of the little pieces that are going on with it and figuring out exactly what's happening. Some people in the book club even thought it was like a ghost story and that the woman in the yellow cardigan was dead the whole time. I didn't get that from it, but it's definitely like lends itself to theories. So if that sounds interesting to you, about a woman becoming so obsessed with another woman that like the realities of her life start to fray, and she's like not really taking care of all of her business, but is definitely messing up this other woman's life that she becomes obsessed with for seemingly no reason. Check it out. The next book I read was The Story of Dan Bright by Dan Bright, told to Justin Nobel. And this was my true crime pick for the Spooky Smart Bitch Readathon. And it follows a Dan Bright, it's true crime, who was a big time drug dealer in New Orleans, and he's telling his story from the very beginning. He went from like selling candy bars in elementary school to like selling drugs very quickly. I think whenever he was like 10 or 11, and it's about him like rising up through the ranks and like having connections directly to like Colombian cocaine dealers and everything to do with like his drug dealing business. And that's I would say like the majority of the book. Like this book is about that he was falsely accused of murdering someone and was sentenced to death row, and eventually through like the Innocence Project was like proven innocent, and they knew he was innocent the whole time but didn't have a different person. They even knew who it was. Like that was the thing, is like they saw in like some of the papers, the source further advised that Daniel Bright is in jail for the murder committed by blank, and it was like blacked out. But like they knew who actually did it, but they had already convicted him, and that's what they wanted. They wanted to convict him on drug charges, I guess, but like could sentence him to death row for this. And it's about like police corruption, and like maybe like this part of the book is about that. This whole thing was about like him being a big time drug dealer, which I found really interesting, but it wasn't like what I thought it was gonna be. Definitely this has a lot of like sensitive topics in it, and that they're not always written about with sensitivity because it's just like him telling his story. So if you need to know any of that ahead of time, that there is like casual talk about you know, things that we would consider like sexual assaults, like making 13-year-old boys sleep with like much older women, but was like very normal for him in his life. And he doesn't like write about it as if it's not normal. So that might catch you off guard if you're not expecting it, but it's his. And so I did like that the book wasn't about like whitewashing his whole life, and like everyone deserves justice, even if you're not like a spotless person, because no one's spotless anyway. We all, you know, you can look up like what the statistics are about like how many felonies you commit every day without even knowing it, or I mean sometimes with knowing it, but that the punishment is not equal to like the crimes, that like everyone commits crimes every day that they're not even like acknowledging, but that punishment is not doled out fairly, and that's not a mistake, that's by design. That's the way that the people in power like things. So I liked that it wasn't you know, like trying to like paint him out to be like a super virtuous person, that's why he deserved justice, but just we all inherently deserve justice. Oh boy. The next book that I read this month was The Cipher by Kathe Koja. I started reading this book last year. I mentioned during my my TBR vid that I started reading it before one of the hurricanes last October, Hurricane Delta. And so my power went out while I was reading it, and just like in the days afterwards, I put it down, even though I was really enjoying it, because I was busy with other stuff and like didn't pick it back up until this year. And this is an incredible book. This is like a classic that I think it's incredible, and I think that it's like mind-changing, but also I didn't even always love the experience of reading it. Like, it's so icky. Like, the people are just like not good. The situation that they're in is not good. Their relationships to each other are not good. I mean, they're written very well, but they're not ideal. And I was reading about like 10 pages at a time, and then having to put it down because I would just get like, it was enough. It was enough. So I read this book like 10 pages at a time, and at the end of it, I was like, whew, I'm so glad I read that. I think that it's very affecting though, because the horror in this book, it's about a guy and his like on and off again lover who find a fun hole that's in their apartment building. And this fun hole is just like this hole in the ground that like whenever they put stuff in and take it out, it's changed. And that's what this book is really about, is like the self and change, rather than there being like a monster or a specific horror. Like all the horrors are really like within. So it's very affecting in that way, because it's not like you can put it down at the end and be like, oh dang, that sucked and that was scary, but you know, that was a monster in that book that was not real. No, this book will make you think about yourself. It's like causes you to be introspective and think about like the horrors in yourself and transformation, and it changes you just like the fun hole changes things. This book is much beloved for good reason, and so I'm glad that it's being read increasingly that this got like a, it was like out of print for a long time, and this is like the version that was published again last year, so it's got a reprinting. But I think that the writing style will turn off a lot of people. It's very dense, like it's written in a very unique voice. But I think that if you read it and you get through it and you like something that's literary and more introspective and you can mesh with the writing style, that you'll be happy that you finished it at the end. Some people might just love this all the way through and not have any difficulty with the writing style. I found it was like 10 pages. I felt like full, and I was needing a little break. So I kind of read this one throughout the month. But definitely I recommend the Cipher. The next book that I read was I Remember You by Yrsa Sigurðardóttir. And this was a translated Icelandic woman in translation, and it's a ghost story. I gave this book 3 stars. It's a ghost story that follows like multiple timelines. I listened to this on audiobook, and honestly, like as I was listening to it, I was like already forgetting stuff that had happened. A lot of people really like this book, but I wasn't gripped by it. There's like multiple deaths that happen, and the story like weaves together like how those deaths happened. And even as I'm explaining it now, I'm like, what actually did happen in this book? But if you like something that's like, it kind of felt like Jane Harper books to me, you know, like The Dry and Force of Nature, and what else did she write? She has like a new book out, but it's like Australian Gothic crime. It almost like had like the pacing and tone of like a crime novel that just like happened to have like supernatural elements. Like there are like horrific things that happen at the end, but it was like, I don't know if it was like a translation thing, but it honestly felt like I was reading like a procedural rather than like a horror ghost story. But if that sounds good to you, I'm sure that's up a lot of people's alley. The next book I read was The Taking of Jake Livingston by Ryan Douglas. This was the group read for the Spooky Smart Bitch Readathon, and it's a YA horror novel about a boy who can see people who have died, but died like suddenly, and their ghosts weren't allowed to go to the not even afterlife, but to be able to pass on. And so it's like people who died in like freak accidents, and it really follows him uncovering like this spirit of a school shooter and like the people who died from the school shooter. And I thought that that was unique, because one of the things that I don't love about YA horror is it feels like it's adult stories kind of watered down into teen stories and just like relationships put on top of it. But that one, having a school shooting, that seems like a pretty unique to teens horror story, because it primarily affects teens and is like a real life horror. Whereas like as an adult, I don't really have to worry about school shooters that much. Other kinds of mass shooters, sure. So I appreciated that it was like something unique, and I thought that necessitated that it be a YA story. But I felt like it lost steam as it went, and there was like, and for some reason still an insta-love relationship. Like just because it's queer doesn't mean that I'm gonna like it anymore. I'm not that easy. But it was fine. I didn't hate it, didn't love it. It was just kind of like a middle of the road read for me. Definitely didn't make me want to like pick up more YA horror, but you know, every once in a while, it was like my one a year chance to maybe like YA horror again. The next book that I read was The Performance by Claire Thomas. This is an Australian book about like 4 or 5 women all watching a Beckett play being put on. And it follows like how they relate to each other as like the play goes on. Like it all takes place over the course of a play. where they're all like sitting in their seats at the beginning. You hear from their perspective, you hear what their experience with the play is. One of them like works there, one of them has seen it many times in different places, and they, you know, like as the play progresses, there's the intermission, the finale, but it all takes place during the play, and it talks about a lot of different topics, like people, there's a teen who's very anxious about climate change, which was very relatable and not something that I've seen a lot of in American lit as much as I see in Australian lit, that I feel like they are talking about climate change in books that aren't explicitly about climate change from the synopsis more frequently. I thought that it also had to do with like the way that we can just miss each other in conversation, that we misinterpret each other in those brief interactions, like both people walk away with it negative, knowing that they either didn't express themselves well enough or they felt offended because the other person wasn't expressing themselves well enough, and they took to mean something like out of malice that was really out of like ignorance, and that other person's walking away like, why did I say that? And just like all of those like very little like human moments that happen throughout the day. But I think, yeah, it followed all women and dealt with family relationships. It was cool. If you like literary fiction, then I would really recommend this one. I thought it was really cool. The next book that I read this month was The Strange Thing We Become by LaRocca, and I have a full review of this up. So definitely go check it out if you haven't seen it already, because it's a big recommend for me. And this is a horror short story collection that I feel like talks a lot about the expectations of a nuclear family and the horror of the natural expectations for relationships versus like opposing to the grotesque. Definitely go check out my full review, because it was a lot better explained there. The next book that I read this month was the Women in Translation Readathon pick, Minor Detail by Adania Shibli, and this is translated from the Arabic by a Palestinian author. And this book is really short, and I don't want to say too much about it, but the big theming of the book is that the title Minor Detail comes from like how sorry, Roland's playing with a bag. The title Minor Detail has to do with about how art historians can see major differences in only the minor details, that paintings can look wildly different, but it's like the minor details, or paintings can look exactly the same, but it's the minor details that really set them apart and let you know that it's something different. So it's about that attention to minor details, and it follows a Palestinian woman going about her day, learning about the minor details in a story that may be commonplace under Israeli occupation in Palestine. So I don't want to say too much about it, but definitely this book is worth your time. It's very good. It's very emotional, obviously, but check out Minor Detail by Adania Shibli. The next book that I read this month was Come With Me by Ron Amalfi. This was a horror story about a man whose wife died, and after she suddenly died in a mass shooting, he finds out that there's more to her than he knew, that she had a lot of secrets, and it's him following and trying to hunt down a serial killer that his wife may have been tracking. And I don't really want to say too much more, but it kind of gave me like Gone Girl vibes, surprisingly, because of, you know, just the uncovering of like a wife that you didn't fully know. And also like it has like unique setting in like the Rust Belt, in Pennsylvania, and it kind of gave me like Night in the Woods, the video game vibes, because it's spooky. It's just like an inherently spooky place that I don't think gets shown as like a you know, like a horror location. To like have like the smokestacks rising up, I think is like a very scary image. So big recommend. This one was like, I think I ended up giving it 4 stars, but it really like, it might as well have been 5 stars because it's basically perfect. I flew through it. This is a pretty thick horror book for me, but the writing is really good and really emotional. I wasn't able to like guess where it was going, and I don't think that you can guess where it's going. Like, it's not one of those ones where you can put the clues together yourself. There's kind of just new information that you kept giving. I guess it's like maybe the only reason that I didn't give it 5 stars is because it's like written like a thriller. Like, you should be putting the pieces together with him, but it's like there's information that's not given to you till the end. So big recommend though. If you like spooky stories about serial killers and you know, teen girls being abducted, come with me. Very good. The next book that I read was We Eat Our Own by Kia Wilson, and I have a video coming up or it's already out. I don't know what order these are going to be published in, but I talk about this more in depth, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. But it's about a horror film being filmed in the Colombian jungles a la Cannibal Holocaust in the 70s by an Italian horror director, and also about Colombian socialist revolutionaries. If you think these things go together, you're not me, because I did not think that these stories, the two plot lines really came together that well. Also, this library copy, I showed it on Instagram, but it has both orange and red Cheeto dust on it. So this is a fan of both original and Flamin' Hot Cheetos. So that's something to note. Maybe those go together better than the 2 plot lines in this story. And finally, I've been talking so long that the sun has gone down. This is the longest wrap-up ever. If I ever read 14 books again, I will not be filming them as one video because this was wild. Why did I do this? This is so long. Maybe I'll split these up. Maybe you will see these as 2 separate parts. Because I've been talking forever. The last book that I read this month was Cultish, The Language of Fanaticism by Amanda Montell. This book is all about looking at the linguistics and the way that cults use language, and both full-blown cults like Jonestown and Nixium and those kinds of things, as well as cultish things like multi-level marketing, Cincy, fitness ones like CrossFit and SoulCycle and Peloton, how all of those cult-ish things use language to make you feel empowered and suck people in, but also how to keep people going and how to feel like it's a necessary part of their lives. I thought it was really interesting. If you're interested in linguistics, if you're interested in cults, I don't think that you will regret picking this one up. It's not something that I would push into the hands of someone who wasn't already interested in cults. Like, it's not gonna change people's minds. I wouldn't put myself out there to make someone think I was weird and want them to read a book about cults if they already weren't interested. So that's everything I read in August. That took forever. Thank you so much for listening. If you made it to the end of this, please let me know. Please let me know if any of these books sound good. Please let me know if I gave enough of a synopsis or what you want out of wrap-ups. Because I feel like I just started talking about my feelings, and that's probably how things will continue to go. But I'd like to hear what you think too. So until next time, bye-bye.